Welcome to Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana basketball news and discussion, brought to you by the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. Join me live at assemblycall.com every Thursday night and immediately following every IU game for our live IU postgame show. And visit InsideTheHall.com for complete coverage of IU basketball and to join the discussion in the Inside the Hall Premium Forum.
Welcome back, everybody, to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink. And with me this week, I have a former Inside the Hall writer who now writes for Sports Illustrated Indiana, Dylan Wallace, and a current Inside the Hall writer who is in his first season covering the team for Inside the Hall. He's a sophomore at IU, Tyler Tachman. Good for both of you to join us this week, and I want to get right into it. Yesterday we had, since I've been covering the team, the most unique, I would say, media day. Dylan, you've obviously been on the beat before and kind of know what media day entails. But this year's version of IU Media Day was different because obviously the pandemic is still going on, and we had to meet virtually with Archie Miller, who spoke for about 35 minutes, and then all of the 11 scholarship players spoke to us for various amounts of time, took questions from the media. We learned a lot. So, Dylan, I'm just curious from your perspective, as someone who covered this team last year, going to cover it again this year, what maybe were your biggest takeaways from yesterday's festivities? Did you learn anything new that maybe you didn't know going in? And did what you heard yesterday, did it change anything, any of your perceptions about this season or this team?
Yeah, definitely. It was definitely weird to do it all over a Zoom call for like 3 hours. That was definitely different. But I feel like my biggest takeaway on it, probably just from talking to Archie for a little bit and the players, is probably just the continuity of the team. It feels like they're all pretty close, even though we weren't in person to sort of see them interact with one another, and we only got them in short segments kind of on a Zoom call. But I just think from what Archie has said over the course of this season, or this off season, this weird off season, and what they've had to go through, I just feel like they've had to become close, and it's just a lot of returning players and a lot of newcomers who are excited to contribute. And I think that's probably the biggest thing and that's what you kind of have to be this year. You have to kind of create your own little bubble when you're not working out, because you don't want to risk going out, doing anything unnecessary and potentially contracting, the virus and bringing it back to the practice facility. So, I think they're all close, and I think they're all kind of know that their focus really just has to be on basketball right now, because they got to focus on that for them to be able to play. They got to take all the precautions necessary, and I think they're doing that. As far as if my kind of outlook on the team has changed, I would say no, probably. I feel like I still kind of expect sort of the same things out of this team from talking to them. And I think the biggest difference, I would say, from last year to this year was last year, obviously, Archie talked to us a lot about playing big. You had Joey Brunk and Trace and Justin Smith, and you'd have three forwards in your starting lineup. And now, just a year later, we're talking about playing small a lot. That seems like they're going to go that route with potentially Jerome Hunter or Jordan Geronimo at the 4 position, and Trace and Race, and a lot of the wings they have with Leal and Galloway, and 3-guard sets. So that's just the biggest thing I think I've noticed, and I think it's a good change for them if that's what we're going to see this year, if they're going to play a little bit smaller and play a little bit faster, because a lot of the stretches last season, that was when they were most effective.
Tyler, you obviously were around last season, covered the team a little bit, I think, for the IDS towards the end of the season, but this is kind of your first go around, getting a chance to cover this team up close. I know you did a lot of work over the summer trying to get to know some of the players' backgrounds, and particularly you wrote a really good story about Race Thompson that I think a lot of people read on Inside the Hall. But what were your impressions of the team from yesterday, and what did you learn, if anything, that you didn't already know going into yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, going off of Dylan's point about the continuity of the team, I think that was something that has stuck out to me throughout this summer and also yesterday. And I think that's a byproduct of Archie Miller's inside-out recruiting in the state of Indiana. And now you see it really paying dividends because you have three freshmen in Trey Galloway, Anthony Leal, and Christian Lander, who all play together on Indiana Elite. And Lander wanted to come early, just almost basically based off the sole reason to play with Trace Jackson Davis. So now you have a whole group of guys that have played together and know each other before they even step on that campus and have that chemistry. So I think that's something in that recruiting, and in that recruiting way for Archie Miller that is really paying off. And in terms of my other takeaways from Media Day, I don't really think there was anything new that we hadn't learned from over the summer yet. Over the summer, it was Coach Miller saying that they were, like Dylan was saying, that they're going to be playing smaller, and that will allow them to be playing faster too. And I think those were 2 points that were just kind of just hit on yesterday that had already been talked about, and it will allow them to have more ball handlers. And one of the other things that Archie said was having less turnovers. So when you have more guards on the floor, better ball handlers, that's just going to allow for more spacing and less turnovers and really help Lander and Trace in that pick and roll situation too.
One of the things that I've continued to think about as this offseason has gone along, and I want to get both of your insights on this, and Dylan, you could start, but this is Archie Miller's 4th season in Bloomington, and this, I don't know that it's gone nearly as well as most people predicted, and I think there's a lot of different reasons for that so far. Going into year 2, there was a ton of expectations with Romeo Langford coming into the program that weren't met. And then last year, Indiana was obviously an improved team, but they weren't, a clear-cut NCAA tournament team. They weren't. They were probably going to make it, but they weren't. I don't think, as people kind of studied ahead of time and thought about what they might do with their brackets, I don't think Indiana was a team that a lot of people looked at and said that's a team that is a threat to go deep in the tournament. This year, you're kind of seeing a lot of the same things written nationally about this team. I mean, they're picked, I think one prediction had them 7th, one had them 8th in the Big Ten. And that, with the resources that are put into this program, that's really not what Indiana aspires to be from a basketball perspective. Dylan, when you kind of look at what's changed in the offseason, what they've added, who's back, do you see a realistic path for this team to be a lot better than last year? And if so, what things can you point to that would lead you to believe that this team's going to be a lot better than it was last year?
I think they'll definitely be a lot better. I think they also kind of have to be a lot better. I mean, if this team plays similar to what they did last season, I think we're looking at, what we're looking at Archie Miller is potentially, what's going on there with the coaching. And I think, from 2018 to 2019, obviously last season they didn't have that huge collapse of losing 12 or 13 games, but there were still a lot of times where they were offensively challenged, and that was a big reason why they couldn't win a lot of games. They couldn't win a lot of road games. And, obviously this season is going to look a lot different just in terms of home and away, because you're probably not going to have fans and cry and loud crowds. But I just think the makeup of this team, with the addition of Christian Lander, you have the experienced backcourt of Rob Finney and Al Durham. Trace is in his 2nd year. I just think the pieces they have just make this look. I mean, it just looks like a better team on paper, and a lot of predictions have them around 7th. With, hey, I mean, I guess it's better than 10th what they did last year, but I still don't think. I mean, I feel like they got to be close to the top 5, competing for a Big Ten championship at least toward the end of the season. You don't want to get to January or late January and they're already kind of out of the running for being up there, So I expect them to hang around the top 5, or I think the expectation should be to sort of hang around the top 5 of the Big Ten for most of the season. And I think it's going to be a product of what they can do offensively, and if they can have a little bit more of a free-flowing offense, because it's just what we haven't seen. The ball's been stuck a lot in the past, and they've been going inside and not having a lot of shooters on the outside. And I think this team presents a whole different dynamic. They're going to have more ball handlers with Lander, and they're going to have hopefully more shooters with Leal, and Jerome Hunter will assumedly, step up in that role as well. And I just think the idea of spacing the floor, playing smaller, giving Trace more room to go to work, And also just, this is his fourth season. They're also going to improve defensively as well, with just all the returning players they have. And I just think if you put that all together, it's going to make for a pretty competitive team in the Big Ten. And the Big Ten's a tough league. It's going to be hard to win games, especially when it kind of just comes down to, you and the basketball, because you won't have home court or you won't go into crazy road environments. But I just think the makeup of this team, the continuity of this team, and the additional pieces they have and the new style they're going to play should put them in position to, be in the top 5 of the Big Ten and be playing hopefully for a Big Ten championship, when March rolls around.
Yeah, I think kind of for me, the first thing I want to mention is what you said, Alex, that there's just, especially going into the second year, just a ton of expectations, and that's going to come with a program as big as Indiana. So, they're always expected to win. But a kind of a side note to that, Archie Miller's 4th year at Dayton was actually when he had the most wins. He had 27, I believe it was. And although he had made the Elite Eight a year or two before, and Indiana hasn't made the NCAA tournament under him yet, but I think kind of taking a little bit more time in that development, and this is a year where you could really see it pay off. And the 4 guys that I think are really the question marks that are going to be the difference between what type of team Indiana is the 3 freshmen the 3 freshmen or 2 freshmen in Trey Galloway, Anthony Leal, and Armand Franklin. And I look at those 3 guys as I'm almost interchangeable. Like, they have very similar skill sets. They can all, shoot it. Galloway's not as good of a shooter, but in terms of what are they going to do? And Armand Franklin, can he step up? Because I think Lander will take some time, but I think he can really produce in the first year. I think Race and Trace and Joey are all going to be solid. But I look at those guys along with Jordan Geronimo, and as being guys that are just kind of wild cards. And if you can get them to produce early on and really mature fast, then I think that's just going to be a huge boost to the production.
Yeah, I agree with you on a lot of those points, Tyler. The one thing I'll say about this team that's different from the last 3 years is I don't look at this roster, any of the 11 scholarship players, and say that guy probably can't play. There were guys the last couple of years on this team. A lot of it, obviously the first 2 years was Archie trying to get his players in there. Last year, there was, obviously some guys, too, that, for whatever reason, whether it be youth or, down the stretch last year, Deron Davis had his struggles with injuries. Justin Smith at times, just from an offensive perspective was unplayable because, you didn't have to guard him. But this team, I look at it up and down and I say, I could see a role for that guy. And I think that's something that is going to help, because I think in years past, a lot of times Archie was just kind of searching for answers and they weren't there, and he had to play certain guys kind of out of necessity, where I don't think that's going to be the case at all times this year. He's going to have options. You mentioned, Trey Galloway, Anthony Leal, Armand Franklin. If any of those guys don't play well, there's somebody to replace them, right? I mean, those guys, nothing is guaranteed. I mean, I think after 6 or 7 guys in the rotation that I think we're all pretty confident are going to play, I think everything else is up for grabs, which I think is going to create, a competitiveness in practice and behind the scenes that we really haven't seen before. I mean, last year at times, Devontae Green had to play because he was the only guy that could score. We don't necessarily look at this roster and say this certain, besides Trace Jackson Davis and maybe a few other guys, not everyone has to play. I mean, if you're not playing well, you're probably not going to see the floor. The thing I'm interested in learning, and Dylan, I'm curious for your thoughts. We've heard a lot about this new offense all offseason, and I feel like a lot of times we get caught up on these things in the preseason, and then nothing really changes when the games actually start. I mean, we're hearing about these ball screens with Christian Lander and Trace Jackson Davis, and it's all fun to talk about right now. But do you realistically see Indiana changing much in terms of their approach and how they play? I mean, I think the main thing that I'm looking for as a potential change is more 3-guard lineups, because I think that's the way that they can actually accomplish some of these these things that they're talking about. But if they're going to play lineups where you're playing Joey Brunk together with Trace Jackson Davis and Jerome Hunter, I just don't necessarily see a lot of the changes that they're talking about coming to fruition. I'd like to see more 3-guard lineups.
Yeah, so would I. And if I whether or not I see them changing, I mean, I feel like every year you kind of expect the offense to do something more, and then all you do is see dribble handoffs on the perimeter for 20 seconds of shot clock, and you're like, what are we going to do now? And I can't help but get that out of my head. I feel like we might see a lot of that early on, but who knows? I mean, I just think with the pieces they have, it should be a little more. It should be a lot different, and you should see some more pick and rolls. I mean, how many times with kind of like Romeo and Jawan did we say, put them in some pick and rolls, see what happens? Or, even last season, it wasn't a lot of pick and rolls to Trace, really. And if Christian Lander, I saw him play a game in Evansville, and I liked what he's able to do and with the tight handle he has and the ability to kind of get in the lane. And from there, you can kick it out, floater, dish it to the big. I mean, if that's a possibility they can use, that'll be big for them to be able to execute that. But I still feel like it's going to be a big, steady diet of throwing it into the post with Trace and, seeing if he can create from there. You're hoping he gets he becomes a little bit of a better passer out of the post because he's going to see a lot more double teams this season. And, you just got to surround him with shooters. If Joey Brunk and him are on the floor at the same time, you're not really doing yourself any justice in that regard because, they're going to come double Trace, but what effect does Joey Brunk have on the floor then? Because, they're going to cut off the inside where Joey would be anyways. So, you got to surround him with shooters and you got to put him in some pick and rolls, that'll challenge the defense for sure. And even, something that I think we heard a lot about yesterday was Trace and Race have both been, working a lot on jump shots. So, if they can add that into their repertoire and, you can have some not even pick and rolls, maybe pick and pops. And if they can shoot some mid-range jump shots and space even the floor themselves inside of that perimeter or inside the interior a little more, that'll just be big for the offense in general if those two can start knocking down some outside shots. So, I definitely hope it's a new look offense. I think it will be just because there's so many interchangeable parts, there's going to be so many different looks that we're going to see on the floor together, which will be super helpful. And hopefully that means a lot different, a lot more free flowing, and hopefully it works out for them.
Tyler, I mentioned earlier your piece that you did several weeks ago. Actually, might have been several months ago now. Time is flying by on Race Thompson, and he's been a guy that a lot of people are talking about. We talked over the summer to, I think, Cliff Marshall, the director of athletic performance, about Race and just kind of how he's healthier than he's ever been. How do you see his role changing for this team? Do you see him playing alongside Trace a lot? I mean, that was something that was talked about yesterday. How do you think those two fit together, and what are you expecting different from Race this season, maybe that we haven't seen in the past?
I think what we might see this year more out of Race is more of a variety of his skill set. Like you were mentioning, his ability to shoot. I talked to one of his best friends from his childhood who he was working out with during the summer, and he said not only did he just see a different Race, but that he was hitting long range jump shots. He was hitting step back threes, and I think it kind of ties back to what Cliff Marshall was saying, is that maybe this summer with George Floyd being killed very close to his near his hometown, that he just kind of gained a bigger perspective of what was going on, and really had a summer where he matured in terms of just focusing and really driving in on this goal of being a better player. But as far as kind of going back to your original question about him on the court, I mean, I don't really see him taking a ton of threes or really becoming a perimeter threat. But I think if he can pull out a three every once in a while to keep the defenders honest, then that would be huge. Because what you saw with Justin Smith is that just no one respected it. So, he could rarely knock it down, so they don't even need to worry about him. So I think if him or Trace can just maybe even just once in a while knock down a jumper to keep them honest, then that could be huge.
I think that's the biggest part, is just keeping them honest, because last year, Race catches the top of the key and he doesn't even look at the basket. He's wide open, doesn't look at the basket. And I don't know, a lot of times people are like, hey, every once in a while, maybe you should shoot one of those because, Justin Smith's shooting threes and we know how that worked out and that didn't work out well. I mean, if his jump shot is improved and he can knock one of those down every once in a while, I mean, because they're going to leave him open. I mean, he's going to be open for a majority of the season when he gets just the ball on the perimeter. So if he has that ability to stretch the floor a little bit more, I mean, that just makes their lineup so much better. And I think it'll be interesting to see how many he's willing to take. If RG kind of wants him to take it, I mean, I don't know if that's going to be necessarily his role in the offense, but I think it'll be interesting to see if he can, as Tyler said, just kind of keep the defensive honest at times. And, that could definitely help their offense a lot.
I think another thing going into the season that is really going to be interesting to watch. This is more Big Ten at large than just Indiana. You've got a situation once again where we enter the season and the Big Ten looks like the nation's best conference. I mean, I'm looking at the Blue Ribbon yearbook, which to me does the best job every year of kind of previewing the college basketball season most in depth. They've got their order of finish in the Big Ten, which I have a disagreement with one of these picks, but some of these teams, Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois, Michigan State, Ohio State, Rutgers, Michigan, Purdue, those all look like, to me, really solid teams. Dylan, I'm curious, kind of as we enter this season, obviously we focus on Indiana all the time, but there's going to be a lot of other great teams in the Big Ten. Who, as we enter the year, who are you looking at as maybe the favorite to win the conference, and why would you pick that particular team?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really good teams that are definitely going to be competing. It's going to be, I think top to bottom is going to be really competitive all season long. Once again, even I'm sure even Northwestern and Nebraska can give some teams some trouble every now and again. I mean, obviously they won't compete for anything in the top part of the standings, but it just shows how tough the league is. In terms of the favorite, I think it's hard to sort of go against Wisconsin because they're basically returning everybody and they won the and they came out of nowhere, out of the Big Ten last season. And I remember being in the Kohl Center for the game that, Indiana went there as a first conference game. They ended up losing by 20. It was really funny because we're in the elevator and this lady said to me like, "Oh, this is like the worst Wisconsin basketball team we've ever had." I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And then they go on to share the Big Ten title and get the number one seed in the Big Ten tournament. And the fact that they're returning all of that, it's hard to pick against them. But, I do like Illinois' team a lot. I think returning Ayo Dosunmu and Kofi Coburn is big for them. And they sort of have this really nice foundation built with Brad Underwood now that's kind of been building up over the last few years. And, I think they're going to keep building momentum off one another. Obviously, Iowa, you can't go against Luka Garza's talent, and they're going to get Jordan Bohannon back. And he was obviously a pain in Indiana's side 2 years ago when both games they played against him. So I feel like those three teams are probably the top ones. But I just think just from what Wisconsin's bringing back, it'd probably be hard to bet against them for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you were saying about Wisconsin and Illinois. I think those are two very talented teams. And correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, I'm pretty sure that in that blue ribbon preseason rankings that Michigan State and Minnesota were all in front of Indiana.
Michigan was one spot behind. It was Wisconsin first, Iowa second, Illinois third, Michigan State fourth, which I think if you look at most places, that's the top four for most everybody. Then you had was Ohio State 5, Rutgers 6, Minnesota 7, which is the one I had a problem with, 8, Indiana 9, Michigan 10, Maryland 11, Purdue. And then after that, it really doesn't matter, right?
Yeah. I mean, to me, I just see too much uncertainty with Michigan State in losing. I mean, Cassius Winston and Xavier Tillman are almost unreplaceable, really. And they do have Rocket Watts and Aaron Henry coming back. But losing those two leaders that were very experienced and had been through the Big Ten year in and year out, I'm just to see them that high is a little surprising to me. And the same with Minnesota, losing Daniel Oturu. They do have Marcus Carr. But I think, those two teams are some that I feel like Indiana can leapfrog, and that has better returning rosters than. And I really think that Indiana is kind of being disrespected by where they were scheduled to finish right now.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'll say, just kind of looking at that, I like Wisconsin a lot. I like Illinois. Iowa, to me, I just can't trust Iowa. I mean, and you guys, this is way before your time, but there was several years back where it was definitely when Cream was still there, but Iowa was having a really good year. They're up to like 4th or 5th in the country, and they came to Assembly Hall and just got their doors blown off, and then the season kind of just went sideways. And every year with Iowa, it's an elite offense, but the defense is just marginal. And I think if you're going to win in the Big Ten and you're going to be considered a contender to go to a Final Four, you have to have multiple ways to win games. And Iowa is just basically, if they're going to beat you, it's because they outscored you. They scored 90 or 100 on you, and I just don't trust that in tournament play. I don't think there's very many teams that can win that way. The team I looked at that, I think Indiana's probably a little bit too low at 8, and I think Michigan at 9. I think that's a little low for them too. I think Franz Wagner being there, he's going to be a really good player. Isaiah Livers coming back. I mean, they do have some question marks, but I thought for the most part last season, Juwan Howard did a pretty good job with that team, had them in solid position. But I mean, the Big Ten, realistically, and we talked about this on the last podcast we did a couple weeks ago with Scott Caulfield from Crimson Cast. Realistically, you could be the 7th or 8th best team in the Big Ten this year and still be ranked in the poll on a given week. That's how deep the league's going to be. So I think that's one thing that people have to keep in mind when they see Indiana pick 7th or 8th. That doesn't necessarily, from a national perspective, they could still be a pretty relevant and good team. I want to shift gears a little bit to the schedule and just kind of the uncertainty of what the season's going to look like. Archie Miller talked yesterday a lot about, and we're recording this on Wednesday, but it's not going to drop on Thursday. So not drop until Thursday. So when you hear this, it'll be 2 days ago that he talked about this, but he basically insinuated that they're going to play one of the toughest, if not the toughest schedules in the country. We know they're going to play Maui. It sounds like they're going to play Butler and Indianapolis. And beyond that, there's probably only going to be 3 more non-conference games. And I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, ACC Big Ten Challenge is probably one of those games, and then 2 other games maybe against a lower tier opponent that most teams schedule some wins in a given year. Most teams schedule 4 or 5. Indiana looks like it's only going to be able to schedule 2. What impact, Dylan, do you think is the schedule going to have on this team? There's not going to be a ramp up period at the beginning of the season. They're going, November 30th to Asheville to play in the Maui Invitational, which I don't think they'll need any beach gear for that trip. But they may have 1 game before that. I can't imagine them playing more than 1 game before that. So they're going to be thrown right into the fire. This schedule to me is going to be a real challenge for a team that, is definitely going to be trying to integrate some new pieces.
Yeah, it's going to be tough for sure. I don't know. Yeah. Because obviously they started out with Providence 5 days after the start date for college basketball. I could see that being the first game for them. Maybe they'll have one on opening day, and then we'll play again until then. I'm not sure how that's going to work out, but it's going to be tough, And I honestly think it's good. Because we remember what last season was like. We went through the whole month of November, and I think it was like 8 games or something where they would win, but you wouldn't really know what to take away from it. You'd be like, well, what? How good is this team actually? How good are they actually gelling? It wasn't until I think it was December 3rd was when they played Florida State, and that was the first kind of real test we saw. A lot of people were mad they didn't really get tested before they played their first road game at Wisconsin, where they haven't won in a while. And I just mentioned earlier how they lost by 20 in that game. So, with all these, with only 5 or 6 games before you go full on into Big Ten play, I think it's good that it's going to be against tough teams, because that's what you're going to have to do to be prepared to go into that gauntlet of a Big Ten season. Obviously it'll have to, the freshmen will have to adjust real fast right away. And But I think it'll be good. I think it's just because all the other teams are going to be doing the same things. And Indiana has the luxury of returning a lot of players from last season. So I think that'll help them, and it'll make things a little bit easier at the start. But I honestly think it's a good thing for the team. Maybe they will. Obviously, the Gavitt games, they're supposed to play on that this season, and that's probably not going to happen. So, there are, it seems like, about 2 slots, as you mentioned, to where they could potentially schedule, a mid to low major team. And, that could obviously be a point for them to try new things and get some guys acclimated. But they're going to jump right into the fire for sure. And I honestly think it's a good thing. It'll help them. It'll prepare them for the Big Ten season. And we just spent time discussing how tough that's going to be. So, you got to be battle tested.
I agree with you on it being a good thing that they're going to be aggressive in the schedule that they're playing. And for the record, not all teams are doing what Indiana is doing in terms of staying in the event. I think, if I recall, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, I think Duke was supposed to play in the Battle for Atlantis type event, which is moved to South Dakota. And rather than going to play, they are going to play an event at their own place against lower tier teams. And I think there's some other Big Ten teams. I know Michigan was one that pulled out of the MT that they were scheduled to play in. And I think the positive in this for Indiana is if they're, say they play 7 non-conference games and they win 4 or 5 of them, they've set themselves up really well for the tournament. The downside could be if they struggle, they're putting a ton of pressure on themselves to have a really good Big Ten season. And that's the thing I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, Tyler. What impact do you think is the lack of fans, which I think we're all assuming there's not going to be fans at Big Ten basketball games this year. There's not fans at Big Ten football games, so I don't foresee a scenario where there's going to be fans at basketball games, given that it's indoors and just the chance to socially distant in a basketball gym is not very easy to do. What impact is that going to have, do you think, on Indiana, which is a team that relies on a lot of home court energy and that games like Florida State last year, they don't win unless they're at Assembly Hall with 17,000 fans on, screaming at the top of their lungs.
Yeah, I think the obvious answer is that it hurts. Last year they were 15-4 at home, 2-8 on the road. So, those splits just kind of speak for itself. But where I think that they can kind of pick up some of the slack is like we were talking before in terms of their togetherness, their unity, because we've seen it in the MLB, teams trying to create their own energy. And I think that if you have a tightly knit group that enjoys playing with each other and really is just having fun, then it's not going to make up for 18,000 screaming fans like it would be at Assembly Hall. But what it will do is it'll give them just kind of a boost of energy and sort of make up a little bit for what they would lose having a home crowd.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we're kind of focused on not having potentially the atmosphere of Assembly Hall, but you also have to remember a team like Rutgers last year went 18-1 at home. If they're playing at home in front of no fans, what's that? Is that a chance for an Indiana to go there and win? Is it a chance for Indiana to go to the Breslin Center, Michigan State? We saw them win there a couple of years ago. If there's no fans there, it's obviously easier to play there. Kohl Center. The Big Ten, in many ways, one of the reasons that the home court advantage is so good everywhere is, it's led the country in attendance for, I think, 30 years in a row or more. There's great crowds everywhere. And so, maybe Indiana doesn't go 15-4 at home or whatever, that percentage of a record, but maybe they're able to win 4 or 5 Big Ten road games where in the past they've not been able to do that. I want to close out, Dylan, with just kind of your, and I don't want you to give me a record or anything like that, but just kind of entering the season, what do you think are fair expectations for Indiana, just in terms of, how the season ends up? Do you see this as a team that can be, 5 or 6 seed or higher in the NCAA tournament? Do you see this as a team that is kind of maybe just sneaks into the tournament? Do you see this as a missed opportunity to make the tournament? Just overall, kind of how do you view Indiana just in terms of the Big Ten hierarchy entering the year, and also just how they finish up in terms of whether or not they make the tournament this year?
Yeah, I think when you look at the kind of progression of the expectations for the team and kind of what last season meant for Archie Miller and them, I mean, they were going to get into the tournament, but it obviously, it wasn't as safe as most people probably hoped. You kind of couldn't really afford to lose in Nebraska in the Big Ten tournament there, and you had some games down the stretch that you really had to win. I think this season, you have to safely make it. Like, it can't be coming down the stretch and you're teetering on the inside or outside the bubble or not. Last four, first four in. You gotta safely make it. And I think that's a fair expectation for this team. You gotta be in a position to where you could be a 5, 6, 7 seed in the NCAA tournament. And I think that's what they're going to aim to do. Because last season, I think even though we didn't get to see them play in the tournament, it counts as them essentially making it. And now, what's the next step after that? Okay, you safely make it. You compete for potentially a Big Ten championship. I talked about this earlier. I think them playing around in the top 5 throughout the season is a realistic goal for this team. Most predictions have them around 7th. So, what's 2 spots ahead of that? And I just think it's realistic for them to do that. And I guess how many they're playing 20 Big Ten games, I think. Is that right?
That's the rumored number. It hasn't been set in stone, but I think that's what they played in the past. I think most people are operating on the assumption that they're going to play 20 again. Yeah,
I'd also like to see them, finish above 500 in the Big Ten. I feel like that hasn't happened. And has this happened since 2016 when they won the 2015-16 season? Right? I don't know if they finished above 500 yet. So
I'd have to pull it up, but I don't think so. Last year they were, I think, slightly. Let's see, they were 8-12. They were 8-12 the year before. Last year they were 9-11. Archie's first year they were 9-9.
Yeah, so that's definitely something I think I would like to see as well. Go by 500 in the Big Ten. I mean, obviously, a lot of people say when you go by 500 in your conference, you'll probably make the tournament as well. So I just think that's another big step for them is to finish above 500 in the conference game, safely make the tournament, be a 5 through 7 seed, maybe even higher, and then compete. Be in the running at least, be near the top of the Big Ten for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think the ceiling for this team is a Sweet 16 appearance, and I don't think it's something that's necessarily that could be a stretch. Like, I think they could be a Sweet 16 team, but in order for that to happen, I think you need to see the quick maturing process of Christian Lander. Adding some assists and scoring and being able to facilitate. I think Trace Jackson Davis needs to play close to that third team AP preseason All-American status that he's been getting early in the season. And I think Rob Finney, which he talked about at Media Day, being more aggressive. I mean, he averaged a little over 7 points a game last year. To me, it didn't even seem like that. Like, he just did not seem aggressive at all. It almost seemed like you just lost him on the court. It was hard to even tell he was there sometimes. But you need to have Rob being aggressive, Al shooting. He shot around 37% from 3 last year, something around there. Maybe even if he can get to 40, that would be a huge lift. And then Jerome needs to be able to be steady and race, and Joey also. And that's a lot of moving parts I just talked about right there. But I think that it's all within the realm of possibilities. I think then you got Geronimo and Galloway also contributing, and Leo. So I think the ceiling for this team, which is definitely possible, is a Sweet 16 appearance. And like Dylan said, I mean, I think they definitely need to, at the very least, make the NCAA tournament.
Guys, I really appreciate you joining the show. And I understand, based on our conversation before I hit record here, that there may be a little pickup basketball going on after this. And I think we're going to have to check back in a few weeks, and maybe a month or two down the line, have both of you back on and get maybe a recap of that game. My understanding is that game 1 of the series went definitively to Tyler. Dylan, you better be ready to bounce back in game 2. Dylan, any thoughts entering this rematch and kind of what you need to do maybe to even the series at one apiece?
Well, yeah, I mean, he had a little bit of home court. He's been playing on the hoop for a while. It's my first time there, so I had to get a little feel for how things were going. Game 1 was definitely, the crowd was going wild for him. So I'm just here. I'm ready to make some adjustments. I've been studying some film over the last few days, so I think I know how to defend him. And then shots just got to start falling. I got to see one go through from long distance, and hopefully, like Indiana, I can shoot a lot better from 3 this time around as well.
Tyler, are you ready for game 2?
I mean, I just want to mention first that I don't really think there's a home court advantage due to the COVID-19 protocols. There was no fans allowed. So that's where really creating your own energy comes into play. And I also want to mention that there was a lot of trash talk by Dylan, thinking that he's 3 to 4 years older than me. That it'd be a walk in the park, and I think he just really slept on my game. So I'm looking forward to getting a clean sweep.
You guys are going to be disappointed to know that many years ago, that there was actually a few concurrent years, that Tom Crean brought all of the media in and did a media challenge where we all played 5-on-5. And really, what I remember about it is how sore I was like the day after, like not even really wanting to get out of bed. And so I'm actually glad that no longer happened, so I'm not embarrassed. But it seems like you two guys probably would have been perfectly built for this, and it's a shame that we don't get to do something like that. But guys, thanks for taking the time to join us. Dylan, everyone check out his work over at SI Indiana. Tyler will be contributing all season long to Inside the Hall. Like I said, we'll try to get both of you back on the podcast again at some point. Right now, we're sticking with every other week for the episodes, but once the season starts, we're planning to get back to weekly episodes, and so we'll plan to have both of you back on again soon. Thanks again for joining us, everybody, and we'll see you once again in a couple weeks for another episode of Podcast on the Brink.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Podcast on the Brink. We always appreciate you being here. Remember to join me and my co-hosts for more IU basketball talk at assemblycall.com, and visit Alex over at insidethehall.com for complete coverage of Indiana basketball. If you want to support Podcast on the Brink, here is the single best way to do it. Tell anyone you know who loves IU hoops about us and suggest that they subscribe. Podcast on the Brink can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else podcasts are available. Tell your social media followers, email your friends, text your family members. For weekly discussion about IU basketball, they need to be subscribed to Podcast on the Brink. We'll talk to you next time. Go Hoosiers.